a good beat. Why aren't you dancing?
Dancing is forbidden. 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 Dancing is forbidden.
Yoo-hoo, running crew, welcome to Dancing is Forbidden. I am Ronnie, lifelong fan of and one-time voice on Aqua Teen Hunger Force. And today we are joined by a very special guest. We are talking to Aqua Teen character designer and animation director, Matt Jenkins. And you may be wondering, well, Ronnie, who did Matt design? Let me guess, some background character? No. Well, I mean, yeah, he probably did. But do you know who Carl is on Aqua Teen? Do you know who Master Shake is? These are just two of the many, many characters that Matt is responsible for. I could do a whole podcast of just telling you characters that Matt has designed, but for starters, let's talk about Dr. Weird and Steve, the Plutonians Emery and Oglethorpe, Happy Time Harry, Jiggle Billy, Cybernetic Ghost of Christmas Past from the future. So many characters, I'll just stop there. We get into a few more in the episode. But Matt Jenkins is a day one Aqua Teen guy, one of those faces on the Aqua Teen Mount Rushmore. Matt also worked on a bunch of other Adult Swim shows that I'm sure that you love. I'm talking Space Goes Coast to Coast, and we are getting into that in today's episode. Lots of history there. Matt worked on The Brack Show. He's actually responsible for Brack's dad and mom, as well as Thundercleese, those designs. And Matt also worked pretty extensively on the Venture Bros, which we will also get into here. And I also learned while talking to Matt that he was responsible for the late 1990s Cartoon Network reface, which is about the time that I started watching Cartoon Network. So Matt is behind like all of these childhood memories of mine. Matt is regaling us with stories of the early days in Atlanta animation, which just has huge implications to Adult Swim and Aqua Teen Hunger Force. Matt's telling us what it's like to design characters for Dave Willis and Matt Maiellaro. He's also giving us just so many really awesome C. Martin Croker stories, which I was not expecting. C. Martin Croker, you may know him as the voice of Dr. Weird and Steve on Aqua Teen, but he's also important to Aqua Teen's animation as well. For example, doing the designs of Frylock and Meatwad, a bunch of animation on Aqua Teen, and C. Martin Croker being this pivotal person to Space Ghost Coast to Coast, also doing the voice of Moltar and Zorak and animating on that show as well. Like, he's one of those guys that without C. Martin Croker, there is no Adult Swim. Of course, C. Martin Croker passing away tragically in 2016, but Matt is just giving us so many stories because Matt basically apprenticed under C. Martin Croker and has so many great stories about working with him. So, of course, I want to thank Matt for being so generous with his time here. And I do want to let you know this is such a cool opportunity. Matt is selling original Aqua Teen production cells because, like, the animations of Carl, for example, those were done on paper. Those were done in an old school way. And then those cells were scanned into the computer where they were then moved around and used in the Aqua Teen episode. Matt is selling original slides from Aqua Teen, so hit him up on his Instagram. Link to that in the description to this podcast episode. That is at Matthew I. Jenkins. And he's selling all sorts of stuff, whatever he has from, maybe he might even have stuff from your favorite episode of Aqua Teen. Definitely hit him up if you're interested in that, interested in owning this piece of Aqua Teen history. And Matt will also do commissions. So if you want yourself done like in an Aqua Teen style, or if you want Master Shake and Space Ghost fighting each other or something, definitely find him over there on Instagram at Matthew I. Jenkins. Before we jump in, I want to thank Dave Willis for hooking me up with Matt and kind of connecting us to do this episode. I'm so excited to share this. Enjoy my conversation with Aqua Teen character designer and animation director, Matt Jenkins.
Working on Plantasm was one of the funnest years of my life. It was like a blast from the past to be able to come back to that world and just dive right in and be in that world day after day, week after week, month after month. It felt like putting on an old pair of shoes, you know, like it was so comfortable. It's so the same. I mean, it's like 20 years later, practically. I loved every minute of it. And the script, I mean, before the boards were created, we got the audio, the radio play to work with. And I was just laughing hysterically. And the funny thing is, like in animation, so you get the actor's voiceover and then you animate to it. So you're hearing the joke over and over and over and over. And after a while, it's not funny. But with Aqua Teens, it's so stupid. Like I was laughing just as much hearing them for the 100th time, like right up to delivery when we're like, putting it all together. It was still cracking me up because it's just so funny and all the history there. And we did what we had always wanted to do. We updated things. We updated the background look. We revamped the style. We added expressions. We added so many poses. So we really approached it with a bit more of a modern spin because we have all these tools now. And we had, the original Aqua Teens was done on paper. Mm-hmm. The cells were actually drawn on paper. And now we have all these modern tools, software, and you can get so much more out of every design, every drawing.
So when it came to that storyboarding process, because this is the first time that Aqua Teen in a significant way was storyboarded because of the unique way the show was made previously with the editors kind of doing this animatic, serving as a storyboard. Were you involved in the storyboard process for Plantasm?
I was an animation director on that and oversaw the entire production. So I supervised the boards. I had a super talented team. I gave them notes on the boards, and I even did some boards trying to make, continuity, film 101 rules of camera, how to work the camera and things you're not supposed to do. And just so it all flows and makes sense. And I feel like we did a pretty good job on that. And we did have a lot of limitations, of course, didn't have the hugest budget in the world, but the script kind of acted like we did. We had the dreaded crowd shots. Those are things that are really no-nos in low budget animation. You don't want to animate a whole crowd like we did with the plant creatures surrounding the car. I thought we came up with a pretty good solution for that. We pushed a lot of boundaries there. So boarding, we had to be aware of that before we got into the animation, that we were boarding something we could actually pull off.
Yeah, and in the new season, these new 5 episodes we got last year, they boarded those as well. So it's kind of like continuing on from Plantasm there. So you are one of the many Aqua Teen tales of somebody who grew up in Florida and then moved to Atlanta. But growing up in Florida, could you tell us a little bit about how you got into art as a kid?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was pretty obvious I was going to be an artist from the beginning. I was always into drawing all the time. I've still got drawings of Superman and Spider-Man that I was doing in kindergarten. Always took art classes. The teacher would always, grab your work and put it into some show. Had a lot of that going on in high school, middle school. By the time I was in high school, my parents were like, okay, you need to start thinking about where you're going to go to college, what you want to pursue. And I don't think there was ever any real question. I never really considered, I want to be an architect. I mean, for a brief moment there, I wanted to. So when I was like 12, 13, I was really into gory movies. I thought I might want to be a special effects guy, making like latex, mutilated faces and stuff like that. Fake eyes popping out. But other than that, I was always going to be some sort of artist. And I went around and visited colleges, and the only one that really excited me was SCAD.
SCAD is the Savannah College of Art and Design, for those listening in.
That's right. We figured out a way that I could go, and that was that. My love was comic books. That's what I want. I wanted to be a comic book illustrator. Deep down, some part of me still does.
Well, you did it for a little bit, right?
For a little bit. That's a great segue, like the sidebar. But yeah, I went to college and I wanted to be a comic book illustrator. That's what I studied. And that's what my degree is in sequential art illustration. I got to the end of my college career, and one of my gifts has always been being able to judge art and critique art and know what's good and what isn't good and why. And I knew at that time I just wasn't good enough. And I learned even a little later than that not only was I not good enough, you have to be more than just good to be a comic book illustrator. You have to be fast. You have to be good and fast.
Yes.
Like you can be a great artist, but if you can't crank out a page a day, you're not going to make any money.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to the end of my college career and I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a clue. And there's like this grace period. I had to borrow a bunch of money to afford SCAD. I mean, it's astronomical now, but it was just expensive then. Like, it's crazy expensive now. It was expensive then, and probably double what a state college would have been. So I had to borrow a bunch of money to go. And then, 3 months after you graduate, first payment is due.
Yeah.
And my parents were pretty awesome. And they said, well, we'll send you to college and we'll pay for half of your loan payment, but you're going to have to pay for the other half. And the loan payment was $600 a month when I graduated. So I was obligated for 3. And as a 22-year-old, that was like an astronomical number. Like, how am I going to come up with $300 a month? Seems silly now.
Right.
But I didn't know what to do. And so they prepare you. I don't know if it's changed now, but they prepare you to be a good artist. They didn't do any preparation for how to get a job. It was just like, okay, you graduated, get out of here.
Yeah. Good luck.
So I was like, well, I can at least get an internship, but it's got to be, they had the SCAD fairs. They do have like people coming in to try to get interns. But I was like, it's not going to work for me unless they pay me at least minimum wage. And out of all the people needing interns, only 2 companies were offering minimum wage. So I applied at both of those, and one of them gave me a job, and they were up in Marietta. So it's funny because it's all like one thing connected to another, because it was that job up in Marietta where I met Clay Croker, otherwise known as C. Martin Croker.
Gentlemen, I bring you more corn!
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, after last time.
This time shall be different!
If it weren't for him, I wouldn't I wouldn't have the story that I have. And that's where I met him and got into animation on that internship. I grew up loving cartoons just as much as comic books, but I was gravitated towards the comic book art. But the jobs I was finding after the internship, which there weren't any, there was no jobs. I eventually got some freelance work, like 1 or 2 weeks here and there, with a company called Design Effects, which made animated commercials. So I think the first job I got there was as an inker. They don't have that job position anymore.
Right.
There's no such job position anymore as an inker. But I got hired as an inker or a finisher, pencil finisher. And that was based on showing some of the finishing work I was doing on the internship. I was hired by a guy named Robert Pope, who was good friends with Clay Croker, also an animator, director. Now is more of a full-time comic book illustrator. But at the time, he was an animation director. And he was like, oh, wow, it looks like you can ink. Looks like you can do finishes. We need those. So that was my first introduction to animation outside of the internship. And meeting those crazy guys, all the directors there were generally rambunctious jokesters. And it felt like a really kindred spirit as this really young guy who didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was this movie that came out called Frank and Ollie. It's a documentary about 2 of the original 9 old men from Walt Disney that animated all the classics. Just fast forwarding a little bit, I think I had been freelancing for a couple of years doing animation and palling around with these guys. And they were like, oh, we got to go see this movie. It's in the theater for one night. And we went to Phipps. I remember it was Planet Phipps. So we went there and I was so inspired by that movie. And when I came out of it, it dawned on me that I could be totally and 100% completely happy changing my lifelong goal of being a comic book illustrator and change it into being an animator, because I felt so satisfied by the process. I finally felt so. I wasn't fast. I wasn't good enough at drawing like the realistic proportions and all that stuff that comic book illustrators need to do. But I was pretty good at drawing animated characters. Even the I sort of later on developed a forte of these sort of like Tothian Space Ghost comic booky type characters. I always had an affinity for that and got pretty good at that and was hired to do a lot of that. I did a lot of that on Aqua Teens later. But it was a process that suited my art and it allowed me to get better and faster. And so I was just like, this is it. I'm no longer worrying about that other goal. I'm going wholeheartedly into this. So the reason why I went to Atlanta, obviously, is because it was the only metropolitan center anywhere around it could have possibly offered me a job.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. I was not going to go back there. Certainly wasn't going to go to Texas or, but if it's not Atlanta, where is it? If it's not Atlanta, it's New York, right?
Right.
And I wasn't going to go to New York. I didn't want to go to New York. I was kind of scared of New York.
Oh, at that time, of course, because you did move there.
Time, yeah. I grew up on all the 80s movies that painted New York with a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious because, you started your career, I believe, in 1995-ish in Atlanta. No doubt the industry has changed so much since then, since the almost 30 years. What is one way that it changed that you think was a positive direction? And then what is one way that it changed that you think was negative?
Well, I like to say that the animation industry in Atlanta, when I got there, was like the Wild West. There was definitely less than 24 animators in the whole city. And all of them were 5 to 10 years older than me. They were a previous group of guys and gals, and they were locals. If there was any work to be done, it was them doing it. And that includes Stone Mountain Lasers, which I think they're still doing it. But for years and years, they had a laser show. So they would beam the laser show onto the rock face, and everybody would go and picnic and watch this thing at night. And the laser show, it does it so fast that it's actually, they could do animation with it. And they actually had their own team of animators, local animators. And so just about everybody who was into animation worked there on or off at some point. This is a little bit before my time, so I never worked there. But it was either that or Clay, Croker, and a lot of these guys, they worked at Six Flags, airbrushing T-shirts.
Wow, that's interesting.
Which is art. It was like one of the only art jobs that they could find. You had to do it on the spot in front of the person buying it. I mean, what pressure?
Yeah, for real.
It's like total pressure right there. And then there was like Design Effects that was subset of Crawford Communications, which was like this big company. And there was a couple of other places that were more corporate-y that did animation in the advertising world of business. And so there was a few jobs here and there, and that's what they were doing. And when I met all those guys, they were at Design Effects. Clay had been a director at Design Effects, and he quit. And the reason why he quit was to do the Space Coast to Coast show in his basement. There's a lot of like history there where the first pilot was actually done by Design Effects while he was there. But then he left, and then the client followed him because obviously it would be cheaper to hire a guy in his basement than the studio. I think there was some bad blood there, which that's just the way it goes, right?
Right, it's business.
And then Clay, as you know, was voice actor of Zorak and Moltar.
And humans, reap my wrath. When I, Zorak, ruled the earth.
I left Zorak in the square with thousands of Earthlings. Moltar, send the shuttle for Zorak.
We don't have a shuttle.
Exactly. I'll go myself.
Okay.
One of the most incredible artists and animators I have ever worked with. So he was making the show out of his basement, was drawing it and doing the voices and stuff. And then he would need an assistant. So that's kind of like where I was getting at with that internship that I took up in Marietta, which is they hired a guy named Joe Peary to be like the director. And Joe is a local artist, illustrator. He also knew animation from hanging out with animator people like Clay, because they were all like high school buddies and stuff. They just knew each other. They're locals, right? But then he was sort of the point person that he turned around and hired Steffi Gladden and anybody he could find. And one of those people was Clay Croker. And that was the first time I ever met him, was when he brought in some animation on one character for this CD-ROM that we were making. Do you know what a CD-ROM is?
Yes, I know what a CD-ROM is.
Okay. It just shows how old I am. and when Clay came in with his animation, and it was just like a folder with a stack of cells, we were just blown away to look at what he. So first we saw what he animated, and then we got to look slowly through the cells, and it was from that moment I was like, this is beautiful to look at. And I didn't know you could do this with, I didn't know the drawings. You look at the individual drawing and it looks like one thing, but then you put them all together. The magic of animation,
Yes.
you put them all together, and it has a different feel. And you're like, that's what those lines will do. It would inform me so much. You had blur cells in it, and of course, he leaves, and we put blur cells into every single move of anything that we're trying to do as interns, and it was just awful. And
Not the same.
it was worse than a Johnny Bravo episode. But that's the influence it had on us, and that's where I met him. Sometime later, six months to a year later, I heard that, and I don't even remember how I heard this, that he needed some assistance, and we knew that he was working on the Space Ghost Coast to Coast show, and of course that was like a TV show, animated TV show, and if you got to work on it, you were on TV, and I was, 23 years old, and that was a big deal, and there was nothing else like that, no other options.
Mm-hmm.
And I called him. It's funny because he called Les. Les wasn't home. He left a message. Then he called me, and I was home. So I got the job, and Les was kicking himself forever.
He fucked up
about that. And then when I went over to Clay's house, that's when it all just. I'm sure you've heard stories about Clay, probably, but his house was like no other house I've ever been in, still to this day. The ground floor was a complete. Every single piece of furniture in there was from the 50s. It was just like walking into a museum. He had art everywhere, and then you go down in his basement, and it was like a library of stuff. Like he was into painting models and making models. There was like little Godzillas and monsters from Godzilla movies, and just everything all on one wall, and every single square inch of the walls had framed art, and they were Bruce Timm's and comic pages, and he was an obsessive recorder, so he had like a whole wall of VHS tapes and just stacks and stacks of comic books and laser discs, and just like you may have heard, Clay he had a photographic memory, so he was like an animation aficionado. Like he could tell you anything you wanted to know about the Flintstones or any cartoon from the 60s, or he could tell you who worked on it, the name of the episode, when it aired. I could talk to Clay for hours and hours, and you'd have to pull yourself away because there was never like a dull moment, really.
Right.
And he was a total eccentric too. He didn't really get started on his workday till about 8 p.m. and then he would work all night. So when you freelance for Clay, you showed up late, and you eventually, because I had an on and off day job, and then I would drive over to his house after the day job and get to work again. And this was on the Space Ghost Coast to Coast show. And I was just like loving life. It was just fascinating. And I felt very privileged, and I was very privileged. But that experience, it was the seed that led me to a lot of things a couple of years later. I got really good at drawing Space Ghost. That's when I learned who Alex Toth was, started mimicking. I'm still trying to mimic Toth. I mean, who wouldn't? He's a master draftsman. And Clay was kind of like Toth, not in his art style, but in the sense that Alex Toth, he did a lot of stuff, but you'd have to read his history, but he got kind of blackballed. He pissed off some people at Marvel, or what became Marvel, or whatever, or DC or whatever. And so he could only find jobs doing like romance comics.
Oh, okay.
For a while there.
Yeah.
The most boring subject you can think about. Every panel you can't take your eyes away. Like, he doesn't have bad panels. Like, everything he draws, you want to look at. And Clay was very much like that. Anything, the tiniest thumbnail or whatever he would draw, just had style. It just was cool. Like, there's something about it was cool that made you want to look at it. But yeah, as you know, the Aqua Teen's concept first appeared on a Space Ghost.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's a direct connection there. Plus, Dave and Matt, I believe Matt worked on it.
Yep.
But I know Dave was a writer on it. Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and Jay Edwards and Ned Hastings and a bunch of you guys all started there.
Yeah. But I was on the fringe. Always on the fringe. Mm-hmm. Never inside. I was always outside.
God, yeah. I saw an interesting you had to do these drawings of the table read episode of Space Ghost with Dave and Matt and Jim Fortier and Clay and George Lowe.
I still have those drawings somewhere.
Really?
Yeah.
But you're saying like you drew those, but you didn't really know those guys at that time. But then you would go on years later to work with them on Aqua Teen.
Actually, those were actually boards. I was creating storyboards for the director who was shooting that table read. And just so he could kind of conceptualize what he wanted to do. Obviously, before you get there, you want to have a plan.
Yeah.
So that's what I was doing, was creating storyboards of that. And yeah, I didn't know those guys very well, but I sort of did. I was just like this young guy that happened to come on a scene that could draw somewhat decently. And there was a big need for that, because more and more that things we're still no animation industry really, but there was something bubbling up, percolating, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to call Space Ghost the beginnings of an animation industry when you had one guy who was the director doing everything, and then he only had one extra station, so he needed an assistant. He could only have one assistant at a time. So it was like a two-man team. And I wasn't the only assistant, by the way. He had other people that he would have come over because I couldn't always make it. And frankly, it exhausted me to work that late. It would be like 1 a.m, and I'd be like, Clay, I gotta go. I can't think straight. I'm so tired.
Yeah.
Oh, well, why don't you do one more drawing? And then I had a 45-minute drive back up to Marietta.
Oh my gosh. And you're working another job at that point too, and that's a lot.
Yeah, and I also went through a whole stretch of no work. I think I didn't work for like a year. So it wasn't all roses. It took a couple of years to... Everything I'm telling you is like condensed.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It didn't happen overnight. But by the time I got into the assistant's chair at Clay's house, that is when my master's degree began. So working for Clay was like getting a master's degree for me. I learned about all these artists, illustrators, animators, not to mention his insane knowledge of pop culture, and tell you all these behind the scenes stories about the actors on Gilligan's Island. And just like, I mean, he knew everything because he could retain it and recall it at any moment. He could tell you the date. If he told you a childhood memory, he could tell you what the date was.
Oh, wow.
He didn't forget anything. And so that's when I was really exposed to like Doug Wildey, that did the designs for the original Johnny Quest, or, you know, just all this stuff. And then he was also teaching me the fundamentals of in-betweening, doing pencil finishes, making key poses, all the basics of animation. So 2 years of doing that with him, and I was working steadily all the time. Not with him, but just around town. I was finally got my feet planted, and I was earning a living, and I was like, oh, I think I'm going to finally move to Atlanta, start my life and everything. And then a company came to town from North Carolina that was a design company that had landed a deal with Cartoon Network, I don't know if it was multi-million. It was more than $1 million, but it was a big contract to reface Cartoon Network. And I don't know if you know what that means, but that's like
redo like just the look of the network, like outside of the shows.
That's right.
The bumps and stuff like that in between the shows. Yeah.
Correct. So that's a huge deal. That's a lot of stuff that has to be replaced. Mm-hmm. And what we replaced it with were those full color backgrounds and the check wipes. So they had this checkerboard theme that would wipe the screen, and that we did all those. So I got hired. I was the first person hired by that company, and as an animation director. So I did 2 years of assistant work for Clay, and then I started directing commercials on my own.
Wow.
And I was 25, 26, and nobody taught me how to do it. I mean, Clay taught me the fundamentals, but I didn't go to school. I didn't work at any place that did anything like that. I just did it.
Yeah.
And I was good at it, and got even better at it. So like some of the first things that I animated that got on Cartoon Network were interstitials for Dexter's Laboratory, Cow and Chicken, and Johnny Bravo. So I was animating those characters, doing things I had never done before. Like if you do lip assignment, if you do if you have chicken talking, it's not like other characters where it's a mouth pack. There's head accents on everything he says, so all of them are different. It's, you know, you'd often do straight ahead animation, and I was just having the time of my life, and I found the place that I was meant to be. So it really was like a master's degree, because 2 years somewhere else, I don't think you'd become a director. And maybe that was part of the whole evolution of me going from comics to animation, was that I grew up in front of the TV watching Looney Tunes. At that time, that they came on every Saturday morning, and I'd get up and go take my pillow and walk straight to the TV, and I would lay down in front of the TV with my pillow. I'd watch the cartoons, and 18 years later, 20 years later, I realized, when I got into the animation business, I realized that the timings were still in my head, like cartoon timing. That's the art form. The art form is just drawing. It's putting it over time, and how long you hold a drawing for, and how it creates that illusion of life. And I found out that I was really pretty good at it. So I became one of the directors in town at a young age. There weren't very many, right when animation was really taking off. Of course, that company was Primal Screen. They still make great animation today. There's still more of a design studio. Like, if you want something to make like it look really cool, you'd hire them. And that sort of leads into the Aqua Teens, obviously, because I was only at Primal for 2 years, and then I quit, and then a former client of Primal, left and followed me to my station. And I didn't have a basement, but it was my station in my apartment, because that was when I knew, like, that model. Like, I was like, I want to do it what Clay's doing. And unfortunately, by some fate, ended up becoming a Clay's competitor. Oh, which is sort of unfortunate. Yeah, in the bigger scheme of things. And I know he felt probably a little betrayed. Sure. But that's business, and it's not me. He's betrayed by the client. Just the same way that the client betrayed Design Effects to follow him. It's just the way it is, especially with the homegrown William Street Cartoon Network, local Atlanta. They were always looking for ways to be cheap. Yes. And it's so much so that, some of the things they did were not cool. Pitting people against each other to drive the prices down and that sort of thing. And it was interesting enough, because I met Joe Peary, who was the head of the Atlanta chapter of the Graphic Artists Guild. So I attended a few of those meetings when I was younger, and they talk a lot about pricing your art. How do artists price their art? How do you charge? And why do you charge? And all these things. And the artists are notorious for not valuing their art correctly, because we produce the art, we feel like it doesn't have the value that it should have. You would never say, hey man, can you come fix the toilet in my house? I don't have any money, but if you do a really good job, I'll tell all my friends how you fix my toilet. You would never, ever, ever do that. But artists get that kind of proposition all the time, even today. I see it happening constantly. I go to a job board site and it says, this storyboard artist free. We don't have any money, but we need you to do storyboards for us. And you get out of college, you don't know what to do. You have loans you got to pay. You can be taken advantage of, because you're thinking, well, I'm not doing anything anyway. Maybe I can do this and get something in my portfolio, blah, blah, blah. So these Graphic Artists Guild meetings, they did these like little games where it got you to put yourself in the mindset of a buyer of art, right? They did these little exercises where it made me, the point of the exercises was get you to realize that if you do some art for cheap, the client will always think of you as cheap. If you do art for a client and you're expensive, they will always think of you as expensive. And then if you pair that with delivering something on time, so they're under stress because they need the art by a certain date. The number one rule is to give that art to them by the date that they need it, even if it's poor. If it's a C quality or B quality piece, it's more important to deliver it to them on that date than an A plus the next day or 2 days late. And if you combine delivering your art on time and you're expensive, they will remember, oh, he's expensive, but he'll get it done on time. And I took that to heart and was pretty good at managing my money. And of course, as a single 20-year-old, whatever, you don't have any bills. You got your utility bills and maybe that's it. So I didn't lower my prices for cartoon. If they approached me and they wanted something, I would give them a price. And if they said no, I'd say, fine, that's my price. And slowly over time, I more often than not was able to get them to give me the most money that they would give. All right. So they were cheap, right? They wouldn't pay a lot, but there's like a range.
Yeah.
And I would get the top of the range. And I always delivered on time. Clay was a far superior artist than me, far superior draftsman. Just his art was cooler, but he had a problem delivering things on time. There was a show called The Brack Show. There was a pilot. I bid on it. I got the pilot. I moved into a live work place where it had I could live in the back and had a studio area in the front, and I put 3 or 4 desks in there. I had some extra computers. I started a little animation studio, and that grew into something. And then my buddy Chris had a company called Wild Hair Studios, and he was like, I want to team up with you. And we were college buddies, and we had done all this stuff together. So I said, why not? After a little while, we were hiring Clay. So we might get the work and take the work away, but then we'd turn around and hire him for some of it, because I always liked what he did.
Yeah.
And I knew Clay, so we would always give him an artificial deadline 2 weeks prior to when we actually needed it.
Yeah.
You have to honestly pretend as though, the day arrives, the art, he's not ready, and you have to sort of actually get agitated at each day past that one day. You'd be like, where is that? This is really going to mess us up. And then we would get it, and then we would finally get it when we actually needed it. He would never know. And we worked with Clay like that just fine. I did a lot of work with Clay that way, but the networks didn't know to do that. And he was always screwing them up. So, because he was a perfectionist. Right. And he lived for his archive. Like, he would rather die than have a piece of art that he wasn't happy with his name next to it. And I always appreciated that about him, but it was also, it's not good business. So everything I learned at Primal Screen is what incubated my work on Aqua Teens, because that was what I did. As soon as I left is when I started working on the pilot. And I met Dave and Matt there officially, because we did a bunch of Space Ghost promos and different things like that. And I animated Space Ghost and a handful of commercials. And then I get this phone call from Dave Willis. He's like, we're making a pilot. We need some designs. And that was how it all started. So I made the pilot in my little one bedrooms. It wasn't a studio, but it was so small. In Virginia Highlands, I was renting a 1-bedroom apartment for $495 a month.
Good luck finding that now.
No, you'll never find that now. So my overhead was really low. I had all the energy in the world. And that was where I designed Shake and Carl. And I did do design work on Frylock and Meatwad, but ultimately the designs that Clay did were the ones that are approved. And you can see what I'm talking about just in the design of Frylock and Meatwad, especially if you could see the actual original drawings on the actual paper. There's just something cool about them that is unmistakable. And I'm glad that they picked his design for Frylock, because I would have never made some of those artistic choices.
Well, I want to ask you about those processes alongside, I guess, just designing for Aqua Teen in general, because before we got on here, I was looking at those DVD specials where we could see all these drawings you guys did. And so many times, like, for example, with Master Shake, there's some drawings from you even that are just way more detailed as you guys are trying to figure this character out. Like, he has a nose, he has arms, and all, like a lot more in like a traditional kind of cartoon look to these characters when, of course, they end up going Shake specifically, like with something just super simplistic and kind of pulled back from anything you guys were trying to go to initially. So for you, was it ever frustrating having to simplify things? Because I see that so many times in your other designs too, when we get like your works in progress to where you'd go from something very detailed to something very simple. Was that ever frustrating for you?
No. I've known Dave for a long time. He's flowed me a lot of work over the years. I've worked with him on so many different things. I've worked with him on things that you'll never see because they just never got picked up. Lots of pitches, lots of different things. And he's an interesting guy, being a writer and director and voice actor, but he's not always the easiest guy to work for. He knows what he wants, but he can't always articulate it. And so you'll end up having to do lots of rounds, revisions, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to use that art to coax out the actual description of what he's looking for. It's like a back and forth process, and there's a method to his madness. So I just learned to let go. Like anyone else, if I'm on my 9th design, I'm getting annoyed. But I don't with Dave because it's just part of his process. So it's annoying to do revisions for a client that doesn't really know what they want and they're reacting negative. No, I don't want that. No, I don't want that. Dave's always seeking something, and you'll get there eventually. And it's always for a reason. And to this day, I can't quite figure out. That's the genius of writers. They know it's funny. And like, I can't figure out why there's an expression of an idea that he's going for with the drawings, because the idea that he's going for a funny idea. And it's challenging. But no, I didn't get frustrated because I was getting paid.
True.
If I'm getting paid, I'm not frustrated.
Yeah.
I'll draw whatever you want me to draw. And as far as detail, I got everything I wanted in Carl.
Yes.
And I think Carl's design defied every logical thing you're supposed to do with an animated character and weeding out detail because of his hair, his body.
Yeah.
Like, it's unheard of. Tracking all that hair, just dealing with that arm hair and back hair. And, his face and all the wrinkles. And it was a great to juxtapose him against Shake. It's just genius.
Yeah.
He's got all that detail. Shake has no detail. And it's like, it makes Shake look like such more of a monster. And it roots those goofy cartoon food characters in a real world to be standing next to Carl with all that detail and somewhat realistic proportions. And so, that's very much a product of me being in the Space Ghost world and learning to draw these sort of Moltar and humanoid, heroic type comic booky characters that are rooted in real physical proportions. I mean, that's the thing about Toth, is that if he drew a muscular guy, it wasn't like Bane, this character who could never really be that way in real life. Like, it was always based on like, Schwarzenegger type physique, something you could actually achieve in real life. It was like very solidly, proportions and everything was solidly rooted in realism. And that's what I tried to do with Carl. It was just like make him like this. What would it really look like? An aging New Jersey guy who was once buff, but kind of ate a little too much, drank a little too much beer, and maybe stopped working out quite as much. What would he look like? And I'm probably the most proud of that design, of all the designs I've ever done. Plus, I wasn't the greatest draftsman back then. I was pretty good, but I still struggled with things, and I still had a lot to learn and hadn't quite fully mastered my craft at that time. But every once in a while, you get something that looks good,
and can withstand 25 years and still look good today.
Well, like I said, none of us had any clue.
Yeah,
that would happen. I would have done things differently. And, we didn't have social media back then. So I'd probably be a lot more famous now had we had social media. And I could have posted even all that Plantasm stuff. A whole year went by and I completely forgot to even take a photo of myself at my desk with the drawing,
Yeah.
I've never been good at hyping myself. And it never was never interested in it. And maybe that was a detriment because it's all part of like being successful and getting more work. If I had looked at it more like a businessy thing, I probably would have done it more. But I never liked to brag too much. I didn't really like to, you have your heroes, right? And I never felt like I even came close to measuring up to my heroes. Those are the guys that should be interviewed and talked about. And I'm just this middle of the road guy that has been really lucky to stumble into some of the right places at the right time. And of course, I've had my share of disappointments too. I mean, quite a few.
Well, regarding the heroes thing, I mean, I would disagree because you're a hero, I know, to a lot of people who truly love your work. But also, I'm sure your heroes probably feel the exact same way. And they're probably saying, no, don't interview me, interview my heroes. But these characters that still endure that you made on this show, it's just nuts to me how many of them you made. I mean, I could be here all day listing them easily, but Dr. Weird, Steve, the Plutonians, the Leprechauns, Happy Time Harry, Randy the Astonishing, Mucus Man. The list just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, and I also was the one that almost always was the one that got called to do the humanoid figures too. So I designed Jay Edwards and George Lowe and Zach Wilde and Tony Nugent and so many other humanoid characters, Ned Hastings.
Yeah, but also non-humanoid characters. Like one of my favorite drawings of yours is in the Broodwitch episode, there's that cow with like 3 heads. I don't know if you remember, but it's like this like crazy demon cow, but it's like udders are so huge it can't move or anything. It's just I've loved that drawing for so long, and then in the DVD we could see the sketch of it that you did.
I worked on this show pretty extensively for the first 5 seasons, and then I had other things going on in my life that made me feel like I couldn't stand Atlanta anymore. But I wasn't ready to settle down and have babies and buy a house like a lot of my friends were doing at the time. And so I applied for jobs in LA and New York. I had met some people when I would attend Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, and I met Craig McCracken there, and I tried to get on one of his shows, and I applied for different places up in New York. And the only ones that came through were New York, so I moved to New York after 10 years in Atlanta and all that success, and basically started over. I got to New York, and they were like, "You worked on what?" That's great for Atlanta and all, but this is New York.
Yeah.
And I really excelled there because we didn't do this in Atlanta because we were so starving. We were so starving for animators. When we would get animation contracts, we were so starving for animators that we would find good illustrators and just train them to be animators because there weren't any. So there was no testing. We didn't test anybody. Like if you couldn't do it, we would teach you how to do it because like we need this, get on this. But when I went to New York, they didn't really care what your portfolio was. Even if you had a great portfolio, if the style of the show was a little different, they just made you test. They gave you a sample of the work of that particular production, and you would do the sample and return it to them. It was either a time test, or sometimes they would actually have you come in to the studio, sign in, you sit there all day, and then you sign out, and then you wait for a test result. So if you got a good result, like an A on your test, then they would call you for an interview. So I tested, and I would get jobs all over the place. And then I built up a New York portfolio and found it, easier and easier and easier to get work the longer I was there. And then eventually 5 years later, my wife gets pregnant. We decided to move back down to Atlanta. And that's when I started designing and directing the Aqua Teen Opens.
I wanted to ask about that.
The first one I did was Aqua Unit Patrol Squad 1. That was one of my favorites, and I hired Clay to do it. So it was, all the art that you see there is either mine or Clay's for the super duper nerdy. We could actually go through, and I could tell you which shots were mine, which shots were him, and you could analyze. All of his were much cooler than mine. But I conceived of the art style. I actually conceived of 3 different art styles, pitched it to the guys. They told me which one is their favorite, and that particular one was the 70s indie comic, inspired by 70s indie comics. And then we also threw in a little bit of 70s detective show type visuals. And so I hired Clay for that. And that was literally me and Clay and two compositors that made all of that. And I love that thing. I don't think I've seen anything like that. I'm sure there's something like that. I mean, it's not super original.
Right, but it's still like a unique
It was unique,
vibe.
And I kind of wet my whistle on it, and then was super proud of coming up with the look of it and directing it. And then a little while later, they asked me to do Aqua TV show. And I pitched 3 different styles for that. And of course, they chose the black and white one. I had to convince them. They didn't even get what I wanted to do. I was like, I want this to have a handheld camera kind of a look. And they were like, we don't quite understand what you're saying, but we're going to let you do it because we trust you. Pretty cool of the guys to do that. And to this day, that was at the top, like within the top 3, certainly top 5 favorite things I've ever created.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's super cool. I'll agree with you there. I don't usually toot my own horn, but the way we integrated the 2D and the 3D together, and this was, computers are always changing everything. This was a slightly before the After Effects version that actually had a handheld camera feature in it. So all those camera moves was actually done. I worked with this guy, Joe Coleman, who's one of my favorite compositors to work with. He set up markers. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're like these little black and white things that a computer can kind of see really easily right away. He put them up all around the room. Yeah. And all of those camera moves in that are actually a real camera that he held in his hand. And I was like, this one needs to whip to the right and whip back to the left. This shot you need to walk down here and then look up, or whatever it was. And he actually did all those. Pulled it into Cinema 4D, was able to use those markers to recreate the spatial area in the Cinema 4D and recreate the camera moves.
Wow.
And then we placed the 3D background inside of that, or either, I don't know if it's importing those into whatever it is. And then we placed the 2D art inside there. And that's how we did it. And
that's fucking crazy. I didn't know it was all like motion tracked, actually.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy, dude.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun. And then, of course, I think we did it and we got it on air. And then like a year later, After Effects came out with an update that had that feature. And it doesn't look as cool.
Oh, I'm sure it doesn't. Yeah.
It's the real deal. It simulates it, but I was happy we did ours the way we did it. And I'm really proud of that. And then I did the one that was my least favorite, which was Aqua Teen Forever.
I'm a beef blob. I'm an igloo. Or a hot dog.
I'm straight. What? I got the beat. You mess with me, you get concrete feet. I got jacked by the cops and shot my tater tots. Busted the moon nice for saying move.
Why was that your least favorite?
It's just my least favorite by comparison. I don't think whenever you conceptualize something and you go to make it, you've got the perfect that's in your mind that you are creating in real life that becomes the imperfect. So I just don't think it ever fully became the thing that I was envisioning. We didn't have hardly any money on it, of course. And there's a lot of things I love about it. But by comparison to the other two, it's my least favorite. Yeah. But unfortunately. I do like the anthropomorphized meat wad, giant meat wad. And I love the Frylock Super Saiyan rip off where he put that energy field around him that's like pushing the earth down. And then that whole, it's like a shake thing where he's screaming so hard, it like pushes him through that.
Yeah. No, visually, it's a very exciting to watch, but I understand what you're saying with the other two. I think they're a bit more just distinct in and of themselves as compared to the last one, as exciting as it is to see.
Well, you win some, you lose some.
Yeah. I mean, but it's not like it's bad. It's not like it's a uninteresting intro. I have a couple fan questions here I was hoping to ask you before I forget. First of all, supporter of the show Lurvinator would like to know, which Aqua Teen character was the most difficult for you to design?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one of those drawings I draw 10 times for Dave. I kind of can't remember. I do remember there's one episode, I think it was, can't remember who it was, if it was the spiky guys. What are their names again?
The Plutonians, Emery and Oglethorpe.
I think it was the Plutonians, where there's some creature, alien type monster in a cryo chamber or whatever that gets out and wraps his tail around the thing. It's from that early 2000s era.
Oh, shoot.
And he made me draw that thing like 10 or 15 times.
One thing I was surprised by was Willie Nelson, the spider onion creature in The Shaving, because visually what it ends up as is just like an onion with spider legs kind of, but going through and seeing all the different iterations you did, like it was a snake at one point, like it was all different kind of creatures. It was fascinating to see that whole process and those DVD features of narrowing it down to what we saw in the episode.
Yeah, like I said, a lot of times, so your first round, you're just doing whatever you want because you don't know what they want. So you're having a little fun, but it's like a spread. You're spreading out a buffet to see what people will come up, what they actually want to eat, so I'm just creating designs to get a reaction from them to start narrowing it down. Because with a character like that, how am I going to know what they want? And also with Matt, both of them are goofy, but Matt, I think it has a little bit more of the goofy humor of the two, and they'll script something and then you'll start to design it. And if you happen to accidentally draw something that makes them laugh, they'll just abandon the script and go, no, let's do it like that. That's funny. And so you just never knew. I never knew. And so you have like super cartoony characters, you have like monster-y characters, and you have like super humanoid characters. In that world, there was no limits, stylistic limits, like any other show. Any other show has a design style, and you're not supposed to go outside of that. But Aqua Teen has defied that, so you would never know where they're going, what they were going for. That's the challenge and the fun of working on that show.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of you guys who worked on the show have expressed to me, is that a lot of you guys will miss working on the show because of how much creative freedom that you had on it compared to other jobs.
It's like total creative freedom, but not. Because it seems like there's creative freedom, but like I was hinting at before, there's a method to the madness. Dave knows what he wants, even if he can't tell you what it is, and you eventually can arrive at it, or he'll tell you, but there's always more to it. He'll tell you something to start with, and then you'll get started, and then there's always a little bit more, and you have to get that out of him. And so there's creative freedom, but it's always in line with their vision.
Well, speaking of your other jobs, supporter of the show SwimWiki would like to know how different it was working on Venture Bros as compared to Aqua Teen.
Totally different. Ventures was a real production. When I went to New York and got on the Ventures, that was the overseas production. So we had a pre-production here where we made the art package, which is like a paint by numbers kit.
Right.
Anything that they're going to need, an animation, any question has to be answered with this kit, and it gets sent over there. Master X sheets that are tied to the storyboard poses are tied in with the X sheets, and just everything is like explained. And then they make the animation and gets sent back over here, and then they do the post-production, which sometimes they would fix shots, do little animation fixes here, or they might edit things around or whatever. And so it was a much larger production. I think the pre-production team was probably 25 people, maybe. I was on the design crew, and I think there was 3 of us plus the supervisors, so that's 4. With a guy named Steven DeStefano, who was a big influence on me. And he's one of those guys that every single thing he draws, even a doodle off the top of his 30-second doodle, is just awesome to look at. He's just one of those guys. It's just and he can't stop drawing, and he's just really good. And I love his work. And he works a lot with Gendy Tartakovsky. And he was like, I don't know, he might still be like one of the only guys in the country who's approved to draw Popeye stuff, licensed Popeye stuff.
Oh, wow.
He's like a master Popeye guy. Yeah. And he worked on his roots go all the way back to Ren and Stimpy, and he's just done a lot of stuff. So he did a lot of those Venture Brothers model sheets that you can find on the internet. That looks so cool. And then, of course, Chris McCulloch was just one of the most talented guys I've ever met, and totally cool and just a nice guy. And
yeah, also known as Jackson Public, for the listeners here, one of the co-creators of the Venture Bros.
Half the time I was just fleshing out design. They were his designs. Like, he would take an 11 by 17 sheet of paper, like the double size 11 by 17 sheet of paper, and draw little doodles of just heads, fill up the whole thing of the designs that he was thinking of for each script. So it's like one piece of paper with sketches all over it. And a lot of them were like fully realized. And a lot of them were just sort of just a head with not much of a body. But it was a starting point for us designers. And it's a wonder that I wasn't fired off that show.
Really?
I always felt like the weakest artist on that team. That was the other thing about moving to New York, was it's very humbling and also much needed, because I got to Atlanta and there was like nobody here. And I was one of the few talented people that was here. And so I was kind of always on the top. And when you're on the top, you could teach a lot of underlings, but there's no one above you teaching you as you grow.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to New York, and they didn't care about my portfolio, so I ended up going from a director to a worker bee, animator, designer type, and kind of starting over in a way, and just soaking it up, I learned a lot about. Interestingly enough, I met Chris McCulloch way before I even got on the Venture Brothers. We were both working on a production at a company called Funny Garbage, and they had a contract to make a series, and he was the storyboard supervisor on it. And because it was in between seasons, I think they had already done season 1 of Venture Brothers, but it hadn't been greenlit for season 2, and of course he needed work. And he actually taught me a lot about storyboarding. And how to approach storyboarding and for cartooning or for animation production and everything. And so when I finally got on the Venture Brothers, it was really cool to be on that was the only type production I'd been on that was that large. So I said it was like, I wonder I didn't get fired, because I was looking back at my season. So I got on, my first season was season 2.
Right.
And I have a lot of Xeroxes because we're still designing on paper at that time. Mm-hmm. By season 3, we're all designing on Cintiq, so there's no byproduct. But I actually have paper drawings from that season 2, and they were terrible. They were all terrible. And I struggled to get into Venture Brothers style, because I kept drifting back into what I call Aqua Teen style. But what was Aqua Teen style? It was my style. Yeah. Because that was the freedom. The freedom I had was to draw things in my style, which was just sort of like this cobbled together wannabe Hanna-Barbera type, struggling to knock off Toth and all that stuff. So, and he kept, I think almost half of season 2, he was like, you need to rein it in. This is the style of the show. These are my influences. Dan Clowes is a big influence, Chris, and that a lot of that minimal cartooning style is in that show. And so I don't know if it was because struggling to get the characters in style or whatever, but eventually they figured out that I was pretty good at drawing cars and mechanical objects like jets and blimps, and there's a lot of that in the show. As you know, aircraft carriers and things like that, the helicarrier. And I never consider myself a car drawing guy. Like, I never consider myself good at that. But he was like, "Oh, you're good at that. We're going to give you more of that." So maybe that was a way of like not firing me, keeping me on, but sure, you can actually contribute. Yeah, but I got really good at that, and I did a lot of characters, but also a lot of the machines on the show, and just try to soak it all up, because I was working with some super talented people who are by far better designers than me. But it was good. I like that opportunity.
Yeah, it's cool to see that connection between the two shows. Of course, besides Dana Snyder voicing on both as well.
Yeah, and I also worked on, a few years back, I worked on Paradise PD, and he was a big voice on that character. On that show too.
Right. Well, you also worked on Postocalypse
Yeah.
with Dana as well as Yenor, which I loved both of those last year. Those were both great.
I never saw the Yenor finished product. I worked on the pilot. I never got around to see.
Oh, it's on Adult Swim's site. You can just watch it there for free. It's a good time.
I think I might do that. I've worked on a lot of stuff that I have never seen air.
I'm sure, yeah.
I've worked on a lot of stuff that I don't have in my portfolio. Like, it used to be a lot harder to get a copy of your work after the fact than it is now.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Because especially when it was like a physical medium they had to send you as opposed to something you can just find online.
It was. Yeah. That's exactly what it was.
I'm curious, with all your time on Aqua Teen, what did working on that show teach you and how did it influence you as an artist going forward?
I talked a lot about Space Ghosts. That's where I powered up, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But you could really say Aqua Teen is my home base. Like, everything comes out of that. Like, my whole career is Aqua Teens. I mean, everything, even Ventures. I think I got hired on Ventures because I actually met Chris at a Cartoon Network party out in San Diego Comic-Con when I was a guest out there pushing my Space Ghost comic book, and also as a Aqua Teen guy. Like, I always felt like I was cheating a little bit to slip in there as like a guy who's attending San Diego Comic-Con. Because I was a nobody, and I'm sitting, but I was behind a table instead of in front of one.
Yeah.
But I met him at a party, and he's a super nice guy. And then I bumped into him again at the Funny Garbage place. And so there was a guy named Phil Renda, who was an excellent artist. He was a designer and they only had 3 positions, and he moved to LA. A lot of the guys moved to LA, and they had an opening, and I tested for it. And it's funny because there's actually a car in the test. Actually, one of my designs was a car.
Yeah.
And then I got on. And so I guess it was maybe because I knew him and he knew who I was. But yeah, so getting onto that show had everything to do with my relationship with Aqua Teens. And Aqua Teens, was a big client of mine when I ran my business, and my business allowed me to get good at my craft. I was animating and directing and running a business, managing money, hiring people, firing people, making good choices, making mistakes, working with clients, satisfying clients, delivering things on time. But there's a lot. So I would say it influenced just about everything because it was such a huge part of the beginning for me. And one thing led to another, as life, the way life is.
Moving on to our final questions, all about some of your favorite things. Would you like to give us a favorite album of yours?
I'm not good at this favorite business. I don't really have a favorite album. I mean,
do you listen to music while you're drawing?
No.
Really?
I don't.
Interesting.
I went through 15 years of listening to music nonstop. It's kind of interesting you should ask me, because when I worked with Clay, it was my first animation job, technically, outside of the spot work that I was doing as a freelancer. I mean, it was the first show that I worked on. And my desk was here and in Clay's basement, and Clay's desk was to my left.
Mm-hmm.
And then to his left was a TV. Okay, so I told you he was a pop culture buff.
Yes.
So he loved anything and everything that was made in America and outside America. He loved media, and he had always had the TV on. And so I'd be sitting there, and TV is like, it attracts your attention, right? I'd go like this, and then he would see my head turn, and then he would turn back at me and like give me this look. Don't you watch TV? So over time, I got trained to just listen to the TV, and I'd glance over. If something was going on, you didn't quite know what was happening, you glance over, see what's happening, go back. And that's what I do now. I listen to TV or movies, but it can't be something that I really want to watch. It's got to be something that holds my interest, but it's not something I necessarily watch outside of working because it keeps me more entertained than listening to music. Because eventually you've listened to everything that you want to listen to, and you're listening to it over and over again. And it's just, I spent like 15 years listening to music before the whole digital revolution when you had to actually have the discs. And listen to just about every Zappa album and Pink Floyd. And
Yeah. Well, I read that you're a Deadhead, or at least you were, and Fish as well.
yeah, I've listened to every endless amounts of Fish. And
Wash your face and drive me to Valente. Wash your face and drive me to Valente.
Boy, man. Wash your face and drive me to Valente.
Wash your face and drive me to Valente.
Boy, man. Wash your face and drive me to Valente.
Wash your face and drive me to Valente.
and Grateful Dead and iterations of Grateful Dead. And eventually I just wanted something a little more complex that holds my attention. And it's kind of addictive too, because as an artist, you get used to, you need certain things in order to like get started creating. Sometimes it's not easy to create, especially when it's easier for me now. But when I was younger, like, just because it's 9 o'clock doesn't mean you're ready to get started.
Yeah.
And so you got to have your coffee and you got to have this, you got to put your music on. And it got to this whole thing where it was like, well, I can't even get started because I need to put my music on, but I don't know what to play. What do I want to play? And then you're going through your discs.
Yeah.
I listened to that all day 2 days ago. I get,
Yeah.
I need more discs. Now I got to go to the music store and buy something. It's just this whole thing, whereas TV, you just turn it on.
Yeah. You don't have to think about it. Yeah.
You don't have to think about it. And I love old TV. I went through this big Rockford Files phase. So I just watched nothing but Rockford Files. I was drawing or animating. I love James Garner. So I don't really, sometimes I do, but mainly it's TV or movies.
Mm-hmm.
I've been catching up on my Star Trek.
Oh, okay. Would you classify yourself as a Trekkie?
Yeah, I would. But I'm also a Star Wars guy, although since they sold it to Disney, my love for it has waned.
I liked the Rogue One movie. I thought that was pretty good, but that was kind of...
Rogue One movie is great.
It was piggybacking off of the old ones, though, in a big way. But I liked it.
The 3 movies they made afterward, of course, I had to watch. But beyond that, I watched a little bit of the Disney series, but they couldn't... It's just... Some things aren't meant to go on forever.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, if you think of a story as a finite thing, then it has certain value. But if it just goes on and on and on, like, well, okay, you beat the bad guys here. Well, they're just going to come back. Like, are they ever defeating the bad guys? Like,
yeah.
If you're just making series after series where it's just this constant drama, I'm just like, I don't care anymore.
Mm-hmm. It's like General Hospital.
So they made all these new Star Trek things that I didn't get to see. And then over the break, or just recently, we wanted to watch the Super Bowl, which is my one football game a year that I watch.
Yeah.
How much I care about sports. And you had to have Paramount Plus so that I could watch the Super Bowl. So I was like, I'll just
see what else is on here.
I'm kind of waiting for any excuse to get it because I want to catch up on all these Star Trek.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah.
But even, it's kind of hard to take, I'm watching the Strange New Worlds right now, this prequel series, and I'm really liking it. It's really awesome. But yeah, so I just stick something on and get to work,
Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you had any sort of favorite game. Now, you established you're not a huge sports fan, but I don't know if it could be a sport or a video game.
Well, my favorite game right now that I've been addicted to for so many years is this stupid little phone game called Clash Royale.
Oh, I've played a little bit of that. Yeah.
Like I get really addicted. I have very addicted to certain games, and it's the only game I play. So I get addicted to one game and I'll play that until it's just absolutely, I just can't do it anymore. And so, yeah, I love video games, but I try not to play them because I don't want to get sucked in.
Right. Because that's what they're designed to do, is to suck you in and make you buy those gems. What about a favorite fast food restaurant? Because you worked on this show about these fast food products.
Well, would it surprise you to hear that I don't eat fast food?
No, it doesn't surprise me. That seems to be the case with most of you guys. But when you did eat fast food, what would have been a favorite spot?
Oh, well, I grew up eating as much fast food as the next guy. And all of them, I would eat all of, like Taco Bell, Burger King, McDonald's, all of them. I got sort of radicalized when I went to art school, when I went to college my freshman year. for whatever reason, we decided to go vegetarian, and pretty much been a vegetarian ever since. And well, I am a pescatarian, as I say.
Right.
So
I was gonna say it makes sense you don't eat fast food since you're catching 1,000 fish every single day. It looks like on your Instagram. So I don't think you need to go to a fast food joint. You just yank something out of the water there.
But you're the only favorite that I have that I could say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like favorites because I like so many different things. But if you were to ask me what my favorite movie was, I think that was on your list.
Yes, yeah. Let's go back to that. Yeah.
I could probably pretty easily just say The Goonies. I love that movie. I still love that movie. I was 12 years old when I went and saw it in the theater, and that's about the age the characters are in. And it was just that whole idea of there being like treasure just right down the street from your house if you only had the courage to explore and go look for it. I've always loved that. And the kid power, the empowerment, the music and the drama, and the all-star cast, like we didn't know at that time.
Right, but they went on to...
all those guys would go on to be like major stars. Samwise Gamgee and all of that, they're great actors. But yeah, I love that movie.
Well, you surprised me. I skipped over that one because I didn't know if you'd want to answer it because you did because of not having favorites on certain things. But
I don't. When people ask me favorites, like nothing comes to mind. Like because I don't categorize things that way generally. I like so many things. Even to say that is not really true. I love so many different movies. Music, I love different, all kinds of music. But that's the only reason why I would be reluctant to answer, just because the way my brain works.
Sure.
Nothing pops to the surface usually. But that one.
But The Goonies, number one. There it is, my conversation with Matt Jenkins. Just so many cool tidbits there that I absolutely did not expect going into that. I mean, for example, Matt explaining that the realism of the Carl character, and in Carl's design, this overly detailed character almost by cartoon standards, how this realism complemented the Aqua Teen's designs, with especially Master Shake's more simplistic design, made those characters stand out more and made the show just look a little bit funnier. And that reminds me of Aqua Teen background and prop artist Bob Pettit describing how he went for a gritty reality with the backgrounds on the show to accomplish that exact same thing. Another thing that I found pretty neat was hearing Matt talk about working on the Venture Bros, which was a much bigger production than Aqua Teen had. And they would storyboard over there, which they didn't really do on Aqua Teen. And Matt had a lot of storyboard experience working on that show and working alongside those guys, and then taking that knowledge to later work on Aqua Teen Forever Plantasm, which was storyboarded. So there's that cool connection between the shows and how Venture Bros, in a way, influenced Aqua Teen years later. It was great to hear Matt talk about directing 3 of the alternate Aqua Teen intros. And I wasn't even aware that he did those until I started researching into him. And certainly, once we get to covering those episodes on the podcast, I will bring Matt back on and we'll talk a little bit more in depth on those intros there. At one point in the interview, he said, if you wanted, at some point, we could go through the Aqua Unit Patrol Squad 1 intro, and I could point out which of the characters were mine and which were C. Martin Croker's. So definitely plan on doing that with Matt. The last thing I want to mention is just how much history that Matt shared with us. And it's easy to see it as just one guy's journey into becoming a professional artist. But again, this was in the Atlanta area, or at least in Georgia, during like the early years of Space Ghost and what later became Adult Swim, and just all of the implications here of Matt explaining, like when he was an owner of Wild Hair Studios, one of the studios that worked on Aqua Teen, how they would hire people who went on to do such big things, like Craig Harton, who now runs Bento Box Atlanta, and just all of these animators that had a reason to stay in Atlanta because of what Matt Jenkins was doing and what early Space Ghost was doing, and then how all of that went on to become the Adult Swim that we know and love today. It's just kind of mind-blowing. He was saying in the early days, most of the animation jobs were and the artist jobs kind of involved these weird odd jobs that you wouldn't expect, like airbrushing shirts at Six Flags and random stuff like that. But all of that just compounds into something that nobody ever saw coming. So it's cool to hear those kinds of stories. And also just to learn more about Matt, because again, he designed Carl, he designed Master Shake, and those drawings have just such huge impacts on our lives. And Aqua Teen would not be the show it was without Matt Jenkins, somebody who really cared and really gave a shit about what he was doing. It was just his talent that let a show like Aqua Teen that was done as cheaply and as quickly as it was his talent that really made it work. Because if you didn't have somebody in that position that cared, very quickly things could have fallen apart. So thank you so much to Matt for coming on, spending so much time with us, and giving us just such a peek behind the curtains, because as you can tell, I'm just so infatuated with this story and everything that he had to share with us. So again, you could find Matt on Instagram at Matthew I. Jenkins, link in the description to this podcast episode. And a reminder, he is selling original Aqua Teen production art. It's not many shows that you could own actual production art from that show. So again, if you're interested in that, that is Matthew I. Jenkins at Instagram. Thanks for listening to this episode of Dancing is Forbidden. If you enjoyed this interview, definitely check out my interview with Aqua Teen art director Bob Pettit. I also talked to Craig Harton, who was one of the animators on Aqua Teen, and like I said, now runs Bento Box Atlanta. And you might also like my interview with Aqua Teen compositors Nate Cherney and Joshua Mullinax. We get into a lot of the computer side of Aqua Teen animation in that one. But also, I've got interviews with Carrie Means, the voice actor of Frylock, and both co-creators Dave Willis and Matt Maiellaro. When I'm not interviewing people from the show, I'm covering the show one episode at a time, where we frequently get some correspondence from a lot of the guys who worked on the show there. So that's it for me. Thanks so much for hanging out, listening in on this conversation. Thank you to Dave Willis for facilitating this to happen. And of course, thank you to the supporters of the podcast. Without them, I could not do this. The Moonmasters over at patreon.com/dancingisforbidden. One of the perks over there at the $5 and up level is that they get to submit questions when I talk to these absolute legends of our favorite show. So I gotta shout out our Highlander Nick.
There can be only one!
There's only one game at a time that Matt Jenkins gets addicted to, just like there's only one Nick. And of course, shout out to our number one in the Hood G tier supporters: Sean, Ian, Captain Buford, Robinson, Jason, Carl, Lesheraton 69, Empower 706, Swimwiki, Lurvinator, Thorin, The Grumpy Dwarf, Garrick, Jonathan, and Calixto. You guys can watch the TV while we're drawing together any day of the week. I'll see you May 6th when we are jumping into our Season 4 retrospective. That's right, we finished deep diving Season 4, so we're going to talk about that season as a whole. Looking forward to it. Hope to see you there. Till then, keep it cool. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Dancing is forbidden. Dancing is forbidden.
If you could go back to 2000 and give a young Matt Jenkins advice, what would you tell yourself back then?
Save every penny, invest the money. Don't think that you made it big and it's always going to be great, and that it's okay to spend all your money running around the country and having fun, going to San Diego. And I didn't understand at all. So I quickly mastered my craft at that time. X sheets, putting your art over time, getting that funny timing. I mean, I was good at that. I was good at it almost instantly, seemingly. Over 2 or 3 years, I went from knowing nothing to directing. But I didn't know anything about business, and I made every kind of business error and wrong decision, and anything you can do wrong, I did it. Yeah, we mismanaged the money, and it all kind of goes back to the idea that we made it. I didn't know that some opportunities in life are finite and they don't come along again. And it's not like I screwed everything up. I did a few things right that are helping me now, but not a lot. I had the whole world in my hands briefly. My biggest advice would be smarter with business, and I would have specific things to talk about the business. I would probably tell myself not to shun technology. You'd probably was clueless about business, but when I got out of college, I didn't want to be on a computer. I had zero interest in being on a computer. I wanted to be a comic book illustrator, and I thought the coolest way to do that would be to live remotely in the woods and in nature, and just had to be close enough to a FedEx drop-off. You like draw all day in my house, and then when it's time to deliver, you just drive to the FedEx place. And I wanted to draw on paper. I didn't want to have anything to do with computers. And so I was slow to embrace Flash. I was slow to embrace Harmony. And I think if I had thought of myself as more of a mixed media artist sooner, I would have been able to have a lot more successes probably. And I also, this is so dumb, but I would have hired a fake boss.
Really? What does that mean?
I got a lot of discrimination against me because of my age and because I looked younger than I was young, but I looked even younger. So people didn't take me seriously, not in a business sense. So I would have hired somebody who had a little bit of gray in their hair and just told everybody he was the boss. And
I see.
It sounds really crazy, but I couldn't get the trust. And I look back on it and I was like, no, of course they didn't trust me, because it wasn't necessarily my age. It was because I was not good at business, right? So they go hand in hand, right?
Right.
I could be a much better businessman now, even though I don't have a business degree and I don't know much, but I know I would do a better job now because I'm older, right? I know things now. I've lived through the mistakes. And, when you're trying to get a network to give you $50,000 or $100,000, I mean, that's a lot of money. And they should be hesitant, right? Because we did stupid things. We always did great animation and we always delivered on time. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean we kept our clients from being nervous. And that's probably one of the main things you've got to do, is keep your clients from feeling nervous about the money they get, because their jobs are on the line. So I had a lot of really awesome opportunities around that time that never happened again. But at the time, I thought I had made it somewhere. I thought I had made it into some place, and that's where I was going to be. And no, that's business is cyclic. Animation is cyclic. We're in a total slump right now. Mm-hmm. The industry is in a bad way right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would have kept every penny and treated it like it was gold. And maybe would have been a little less, I would advise myself to be a little less uptight. It's very uptight at that time, because I think I was the only guy trying to be the voice of reason.
Yeah.
In a sea of animators that aren't always reasonable.
Well, yeah, you were telling us how you were hanging around with a rowdy group earlier when you were younger, so it makes sense that you're trying to be a little bit more stern as you became the businessman. Yeah,
it was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable to be there, and the longer I was there, the less art I was making. Mm. And now, I'm not working at Bento right now, but that was, I did 4 years at Bento Atlanta. I hope to get back in there when they get busy again. But that was probably my favorite place that I've ever worked.
Oh, wow.
Including my own studios.
Wow.
And it's because the way they set their pipeline up, and they put so much emphasis on production, and the production people manage all the tedious notes and client stuff and schedules and everything, that it's real support for me to just do what I do best, which is be an animation director. I don't have to juggle two different things there. Mm-hmm. I just make artistic decisions one after another all day long, day after day, to make what we're working on the best that it can be. And that's, the Plantasm. I was kind of hoping to talk a little more about Plantasm because I'm really proud of that movie. Mm-hmm. I think it's beautiful. It's funny. We did a lot. The characters go to a lot of different locations.
Yes.
The intro is amazing. The credits, the opening credits, phenomenal for the amount of time that we had. The artists that I got to work with who were on my team were phenomenal. And of course, I don't know if you know, but that's when we modernized the entire original library. So the original library was real drawings on paper, scanned into Photoshop, and then the pencil finishes were darkened into a black line and painted and sequenced in After Effects. And then we basically re-inked over every single drawing in Toon Boom Harmony to get it into that program as a vector art that gives you infinite scalability and gives you the ability to manipulate, one drawing.
Right.
Yeah, it can be animated. You can take a straight French fry and bend it like it has an elbow, and you don't have to redraw it again. And just all the modern tricks that are so great. So I really loved that movie, and it was really to pair it with Bento. It was just a dream come true. And working with Craig Harton on it, Craig and I have a pretty rich history. It goes all the way back to those days in the early 2000s.
Yeah, the way he kind of described it to me was that you are kind of the one that helped him get into the industry in a way.
Yeah, we hired him. He was our compositor. Yeah, he was a young baby-faced guy, but the odd thing, he was married and had a baby. So we were like these two guys who were older, but not much older, a few years older, and with the Peter Pan complex of never wanting to grow up, and we didn't have kids. We just had girlfriends, and so we were like, wow, we want to help this guy. He's really good, but he's also got a family.
Yeah.
We need to keep him employed, and we kept him around as long as we could, and and eventually we ran our business into the ground, and he left to go do his thing at what became a somewhat rival company. But I was glad to be able to come back in town, when I did, and get reacquainted with him. And then he finally left that company and started his own thing, which became Bento.
Right.
The Bento Atlanta.
Yeah.
And, it's just amazing. A lot of the people, so my company crashed and burned, Wild Hair Studios, but we were really influential at a very crucial time. And I'm proud that a lot of the people that we hired at that time who were nobodies, well, we were nobodies. Everybody starts out as nobody, but they're young people starting in the business. And now a lot of those people are heads of the animation industry. If they're not studio head or a director of this show or a director here, and there wasn't anything going on. So if we had not been around, they would have passed through town and gone to some other town. You know what I mean? Like, it was so dead that, what do you do? If you want to be in the industry and you don't want to go get a job at McDonald's or something, you would have had to move. But we were able to flow work, a little bit of work, through Adult Swim, and then our other big client was Cartoon Network Latin America, which we did a lot of commercials for Cartoon Network Latin America. So we would do them in English, and then they would redub them in Spanish. But to us, it was just work. Right. We didn't care.
Right. I think the cool thing too with Aqua Teen specifically is that like Bento did the Aquadonk side pieces in Plantasm, and then of course Floyd County did the newest season of the show, but Todd Redner's over there. I think it's so cool the way that you guys who all worked on the show are still kind of like passing it back and forth in this way.
Yeah, I was disappointed because we were supposed to do that series. We did the movie, we updated the library, but the network is sort of obligated to go with the lowest bidder,
Right.
At least if the lowest bidder can do a good job. And of course they did I'm sure they did a great job. All of our digitized assets.
Yeah.
But yeah, they came in. So I would probably still be there had we gotten that contract, but I don't think it was a full series.
It was 5 episodes. Yeah, it was
5 episodes. So it's not that big a deal, but just to be in that world for a little bit longer would have been fun.
Yeah.
And I'm still hoping, stupidly, stupidly, I'm still hoping for another Aqua Teen movie. I don't know if there's a time limit or whatever, but there was fans would be happy to hear that at that time there was contractually a second movie option. So I think the idea was that, and then the movie came out, I never heard anything. I never heard one thing about whether it did well, didn't do well, whether it met their expectations, exceeded or didn't meet their expectations of how many views and blah, blah, blah. I never heard one word. But the way they do contracts, sometimes it's so hard to get contracts back and forth and signed that they'll put in a thing that says, oh yeah, well, if we want to do another one, it's all connected to this contract. So they wouldn't have to go sign something again or go through all that again. So I guess the idea was that if it did really well, they would do another one. And, and I don't know what the metrics are. I've never known what the metrics are because Aqua Teens has never really done that great. I think the best, I could be wrong, I could be way off, but I thought the best that they ever did would be like 250,000 people watching at any given time.
Okay. I don't know those numbers either. So.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
I don't know why that's sticking in my mind. Maybe 250,000, 300, 400,000 people, but it's never been in the millions. There's never been millions of people watching an Aqua Teen that airs, to my knowledge.
Right.
So I don't know what the metrics are, but I would love to do another movie because it was so much fun. And there's obvious interest, and does seem like the Aqua Teens fans will never die.
Yeah, it's I can tell you there's lots of young people getting into it still, so there's a supply of new Aqua Teen fans ready for more content.
Yeah, it's something cool. But we need something new. I actually helped Matt and Dave. I did some designs for a pitch that they're doing. They're pitching it around, and hopefully somebody will pick it up, and who knows, it could go on for 10 years or 10 or 15 years. Who knows? So there's more outside of Aqua Teens, but gosh. And, I would love to work with those guys in any capacity. Of course, Dave wasn't involved with Postacalypse, but that working on Postacalypse with Matt was just so goofy and silly. In fact, the silliness of that movie is like Aqua Teens multiplied by 10. I mean, it's just dumb.
Yeah, it's all over. Yeah. I told Matt, because I had Matt on the show to talk specifically about that film, and when I first saw it, I wasn't able to watch. Well, I don't even think there was a trailer out when the film came out. Like, I think the trailer came out like the next day or something. So I didn't know what to expect going into it. And it opens with like that peaceful kind of like animal scene. I'm like, oh, all right. And then they just all get fucking slaughtered at the beginning. I was like, okay, we're in for a wild ride on this one, I guess.
There was more blood in that than anything I've ever worked on.
I believe it. Yeah.
Blood /
marinara
sauce. I've had a really good career for the most part. I do wish it was steadier work, right? All the experience I've had, I'm still not fully employed.
Right. And
it's a very strange, fickle business, but I'm not bored at work, and I don't hate what I do. So I better than a lot of people.
I'm not an artist or anything, so doing this podcast has been a huge eye-opener, because I just talked to Craig Harton not that long ago, and you were still at Bento Box, and then once you and I were going to talk, and then I see like, everyone's looking for a job now and all this stuff. I'm like, oh my God, this industry is crazy. Like, it's just nuts.
Well, the writer's strikes.
Yes, slowed things down.
Actors' strikes. They don't realize they really messed us up, and we don't. I'll never see one extra penny because of the deals that they made.
True.
Yet, I've lost thousands of dollars, thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, potential dollars because of it. And I was always skeptical about how quickly the work would come back. And so we have had how many months since they made their deal, and they were all happy.
Yeah.
There's no news or even a whisper of work coming.
Well, yeah, like on that note, I know that Postapocalypse was supposed to get like another film, but last I heard from Matt is that nobody knows what's going on with it still because of everything.
Well, what I heard was that deal was dead.
Oh.
So we did 3 movies for Tubi while I was at Bento. And there was already discussion about doing 3 more. 3 more movies for me would be at least a year's worth of work, the way we were doing them. And the last I heard was they're not going to make those because the first 3 movies didn't make any money. Well, why didn't they make any money?
Because Tubi is free.
Because nobody
knew about them. Yeah,
is that nobody knows that they're there. So everybody listening to this, please go watch Postapocalypse, Millennial Hunter, or Big Bruh on Tubi. I don't know if it'll actually help us revive a deal, but it's always the business side of my industry is I've never understood it. It's like, well, you spent millions of dollars to get these movies made, but you wouldn't advertise for them to tell people are there, and then now you don't want to make more because nobody saw them, but nobody saw them because you didn't tell anybody.
Right.
It's just, why did you even make them to begin with? It's just like...
I was saying the same thing on the podcast back when Postapocalypse came out, because for a long time, the only reason I knew it was coming out still was because Matt assured me it was. Like, otherwise there was no promotion for it. There was, like I said, the trailer came up like after the movie was out. It was mind-boggling to me. I'm like, how is this how this business is ran? That you guys are doing basically no promotion for it. And then then they're, oh, well, nobody watched it. Well, yeah, I wonder why.
I don't know. I feel like people, it's beyond my pay grade.
I know.
I don't know how it feels to be a CEO and have a board of directors pressuring me to maximize profits or every single decision's got to be the smartest decision. And, the expectations and all that stuff, but they come in. I've had so many things wrecked by new CEOs coming in and tightening the ship. Somebody had a 2-part question I never answered. The second part, which was the best and worst thing or whatever.
Oh, yeah, for the Atlanta animation industry.
The one of the worst things that ever happened to me was when AOL bought out Time Warner. Time Warner somebody bought out somebody that owned Cartoon Network and all the subsidiary industries. And I lost an $80,000 contract overnight. Because what happens is they take over a company, they acquire a company, and then they go in and raid the budgets. So they get their new company in their hands, and then they get their bean counters go into every section and look at their budgets and say, hey, how can you tighten ship and spend $100,000 less than you spent last year, or whatever? And then they go and they find, okay, well, we're not going to do this creative idea. We're not going to do this creative idea. And for a young animation company, a 5-person animation company, an $80,000 contract is huge. And that was just one of them that went away from that merger. And I've lost a lot of work that way. I lost a lot of work from CEOs, people I'd like to name, but I'm not going to name them. Cavalier decisions that just affect everyone underneath them.
I mean, that's what just happened at Adult Swim, where they let go of like Ned Hastings and a bunch of other Aqua Teen longtimers and Adult Swim longtimers who have been there 20 plus years, and boom, just let them go just because somebody else bought the company.
And I was there 20 years ago when they got hired, and I was like begging them to hire me. They wouldn't hire me. I've only gotten 2 job offers in my entire life.
Really?
For a full-time position. One of them was Primal Screen. Well, I got hired at Floyd County and Bento, but neither of those were technically full-time hires. They just were so busy, I just kept working. But it was always a temporary project. Felt like I was full-time, but it's crazy. That's the death of an era for us Atlanta animation people that were around. That was something you could count on, and it's gone now. It's like it will never be replaced. Like, you won't have another Aqua Teens without that homegrown making it up as you go along William Street kind of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
That was the beauty and the downside at the same time that created such a weird property like Aqua Teens that end up having such legs to keep going, because it's not a regurgitation of something else.
Mm-hmm.
So many cartoons are just like, oh, that's sort of like that other cartoon. But yeah, you just got to roll with it sometimes, and you got to diversify. I knew that back then from just trying to make it. That's why these young guys and girls are struggling right now, because they were able to get out of college and go to a big studio and get a job. They didn't scrap. They don't know what it's like to find anything that you can get your hands on that's art. To defend them at the same time, it's not easy to get jobs now. I mean, I've got 20 plus years of experience, and it's not easy for me to get a job because nobody will pick up the phone. Nobody will answer the emails. When I got out of college, you called people. You got them on, and they would pick up. And they would say, "Who's this?" Say, "Hey, I'm a local artist. Yeah. I would really like to meet somebody there. Does anybody have the time?" And you had to develop conversational skills and how to keep somebody on the phone and how to go to an interview and talk to them. And if you go to an interview and be able to have a conversation that's pretty decent with somebody, that's halfway to getting hired.
Right.
Because you don't want to hire somebody that's like an awkward weirdo, but you can't get any, like the internet sucks in a way because it's like this shield. It's a barrier. You think I can get an email, I can get my portfolio in front of them in an instant. Well, yeah, you and 1,000 other people.
Right. It brings us together, but it also in a way like pushes us apart.
Yeah. So when I was scrapping around, I was doing ads for local county newspapers that might need a little spot illustration, or drawing a kid's book illustration for somebody who's got an idea for a children's book, I was doing anything at all. I mean, even while I was in New York, I was doing, I think I did a bat mitzvah video.
Oh, wow.
Where I designed the girl coming of age and had her delivering a line as an animated character that was going to be played at her bat mitzvah. Just anything you can get your hands on. And I was working at a health food grocery store. Things that are not art related.
Right, yeah.
You got to do what you got to do. It's diversify.
Right.
So.
Right. That's good advice for any artists listening in here. Diversify.
And just hunker down and keep making your art on the side and get good at what you do. And my biggest advice for young people, not that they asked.
I'm sure there are many who would like to know, especially from you.
My biggest advice is the people you meet. Keep in touch with the people you meet. I got let go from Bento. I had no clue what I was going to do. I've sent out dozens and dozens and dozens of resumes through job boards. Every single job I've gotten in the past 8 months has been from talking to somebody I know. And I've gotten 0 jobs from sending things out through job board listings. So you got to cultivate anybody you've ever worked with, any that was side by side with you, anybody you've ever worked with that was above you, producers, directors, stay in touch. Don't forget about them, because they know you. They know you're not a weirdo. They know what art you can do. And that is literally half of getting a job.
Right.
Because you don't want to work. You want to work with a person who is extremely awesome at their art, but moody and silent, or someone who's kind of a little bit better than mediocre, but awesome to be around and has great conversational skills and can chit chat and be a good person. It's like, that's who you want to be with in your studio.
Right.
Of course you want to make great art, but there's a process that can refine the art. There's not a process that can refine your person.
That's so good. One thing I want, because you mentioned Plantasm, and I do want to say that I loved that movie, and I liked it more than the first movie. So I wanted to
Me
let
too.
you know that because I thought it was fantastic. I really enjoyed that movie a lot.
Thanks.